Here we go. Another pattern. Good. Back. Good to see you. Yeah, you too. The only one that should. You should. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, that's what I heard.
No. Morning, Christina. How are you?
Good, how are you? Yes. Everybody
Right.
You're worried about it.
That's what I'm Oh, yeah.
No, but and Joshua was there too. Yeah. And so, but they were all, it was the Monsignor, older guys. No, not yet. But anyway, they were all, it was really heartwarming. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a lot less people. But there was, the thing that I loved the most is the morning. So proud of it.
Good morning. I hope you're all doing well. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first forum on systemic inclusion. I'm Mark Sanders, professor of English and Africana Studies here at Notre Dame, and I'm the director of the Initiative on Race and Resilience. And I have the honor of serving as moderator for today's discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to extend a special welcome to a few people here and online. First, thank you to Matthew O'Donnell and John Poller and the Lions Leadership Group of the class of 1972. They conceived the idea of the forum and approached the initiative on race. And so IRR is very proud to partner with them to organize this discussion. If you could silence your phones, that would be wonderful. To organize this discussion and hopefully many more to follow. I would also like to thank the Alumni Office for allowing us to be part of Reunion Weekend. Also, there are a few folks here I'd like to just say hello to, both here, physically here and online. One, John McGreevy, the incoming provost for the university. It really means a lot when the upper administration comes to discussions like this. It speaks volumes to the investment of the university as a whole in these discussions. And so, John, I really do appreciate your presence here. Sarah Mustillo, the dean of the College of Arts and Letters, is feeling a bit under the weather, but it's to my understanding that she's online watching us being live streamed. And so I wanted to say hello to Sarah. I hope she feels better soon. And all of us should be very much aware that it is as a result of Sarah Mustillo's vision and drive that we have an initiative on race. And so whenever we have an event, we always want to acknowledge Sarah's leadership. So thank you so much, Sarah. As always, I mean, you could actually hear my voice. I mean, as always, we have to say thank you to the IT support. We're being live streamed. This will be videotaped. There'll be an archive of this event as well as the events to follow. And so all of that would be impossible if it weren't for the IT support. So I want to thank everyone who has helped us in that capacity. And last but not least, we all need to thank Maria Tanksley. Every detail that's required for this to take place, the housing, the transportation, organizing with IT, getting the venue, is all because of Maria Tanksley. So thank you so much, Maria. As you know, Notre Dame recently launched the Initiative on Race and Resilience, what I'll now call IRR, a community of scholars, students, artists, and community organizers united in the redress of systemic racism and the support of communities of color. The creation of IRR is very much in keeping with Notre Dame's Catholic social mission to confront injustice. Over the past 2 years, we have witnessed too many examples of racial injustice, and in response, Notre Dame has redoubled its efforts, quote, to create a sense of human solidarity and concern for the common good, as our mission statement states so eloquently. Part of IRR's mission is to help Notre Dame identify more specifically what it needs to change in order to support its students of color more fully. Toward that end, we are honored to partner with the Lions Leadership Group and to present the Forum on Systemic Inclusion. As defined by the Lions Leadership Group, systemic inclusion serves as a rejoinder to systemic racism, and thus works to create a fully inclusive community here at Notre Dame and help in the national and worldwide effort to combat racism and promote equality and justice. Such a response to systemic racism requires close self-examination and the bravery and honesty to hear uncomfortable truths, as well as to identify what Notre Dame does well and thus build on those strengths. And so we've gathered today to hear from 5 distinguished alumni. You have their bios in front of you, and I would encourage you to read them if you haven't already done so. Each of our panelists is highly successful in her or his field of expertise, and we are very thankful that you have volunteered your time and insights to advance this vital conversation. And so from my left to far right, we will begin with Dr. Bill Hurd, class of 1969. Next, we will hear from Madi Fuentes Martin, class of 1989. And then next is Deswood Etsidi, class of 92 and 93. You might explain both. And Caitlin Turner will be next, class of 2012, and Shalene Bayi, class of 2020. We will first hear each panelist's reflections on her or his experiences here at Notre Dame, then their suggestions as to what Notre Dame needs to address and perhaps recommendations as to how best to address the issues raised. We will then have time for questions and answers from the audience, and toward that end, you each have access to, you might have gotten them already, a card on which you can write questions and suggestions. So please do so. They will be collected. In fact, the folks with the Lions t-shirt will collect the cards and give them to me, and I'll read them in order to facilitate the question and answer process. Again, thank you all for being here this morning, and without further ado, we'll begin with Dr. Hurd. So Dr. Hurd, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Class of 1969, double E, Green Phillips Hall, freshman year, Lions Hall, second year, Alumni Hall, third and fourth year. Had a very illustrious college career. I came from Memphis in the 60s, Memphis, Tennessee, which during the times of very volatile racial climate. We had Martin Luther King assassinated in my hometown. We had Black Power. We had all kind of race riots and things like that. I came to Notre Dame from an all black high school, Manassas High School. We had books borrowed from the white schools. I mean, it was a hand-me-downs. We had no track. I was an athlete and a student athlete. Fortunately, I ran a 9.3 seconds in the 100-yard dash, which broke the national record. So I had offers to go practically anywhere I wanted to go. Southern Cal, UCLA, Villanova at the time. West Point even tried to get me to come there. I chose to come here because I knew about the academic and athletic combination that I thought I would enjoy. Plus, the track coach came down. I had like 50 plus offers, and the track coach from Notre Dame was the only one that came down to watch me perform. Alex Wilson, who's an Olympian himself from Canada. So in a beautiful campus, I fell in love with the campus, and I decided to come here. My freshman year, the admissions department paired me up roommates with Mike Holtzapfel from Arlington, Ohio, southern Ohio, near the Kentucky border. Very white, not very minorities, but anyway, they knew what they were doing. So I come from a segregated Memphis, paired up with my roommate was, come from an all-white community, and it worked out. They knew what they were doing. They did it on purpose, I'm sure. But anyway, the first few weeks were kind of rough because he would listen to the hillbilly music, and he would sleep with the window wide open. And after the first semester, though, he started listening to Marvin Gaye. And so it worked out. But my whole experience here was positive. So much so that I have two sons that both came here. My younger son got a double degree in computer science and Japanese, Ryan Hurd, who now is a computer animator and visual effects artist in LA. My oldest son, interestingly, came here for 2 years and didn't like the racial climate. And he finished up at Xavier down in New Orleans. So it's not, not all positive in terms of my offsprings. There's a lot of work to be done. Notre Dame is a special place, though. I think Notre Dame learned a lot from me, and I learned a lot from being here. I had a very successful track career here. I was Athlete of the Year in '68, Moose Cross Award in 2000. I gave the Emil Hoffman Lecture in 2001. Thanks to Dr. Mark Walsh. Is he here? There he is up there. And I was NCAA Silver Anniversary Award winner along with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Calvin Hill and Jim Ryan and a few others. It was in 1994. All-American ×6 here. I still hold the Notre Dame 100 meters and 200 meter records.
I don't want to go after Dr. Hurd, so I'm going to let this. Buenos dias. My name is Mari Fuentes Martin. As far as my Notre Dame identity, I'm class of '89 undergrad, Green Phillips Hall. That's class of '94, Master's of Science in Administration, so I'm a double donor. I have that on my Instagram profile, and my friends are like, what is that? Explain the donor concept. And then I have my doctorate in Ed Leadership from Texas A&M Corpus Christi. My personal identity pronouns, she, hers, ella. I like the label Chicana, which to me means proud Mexican American. I'm a mother, wife, daughter, sister, educator, ally, and that kind of describes, all of me as a person. I'm from South Texas. I grew up on the Texas-Mexico border near Brownsville. I never saw Notre Dame before I started school here. I was recruited at a Hispanic leadership conference in Austin between my sophomore and junior year by a recruiter named Rosie Valencia Courtney, who was from Tucson, Arizona. Her husband was in law school and she worked in admissions. And when I was a senior, I know that the admissions office hand-signed every letter. And Rosie wrote at the bottom of my letter, "Saw you guys broke 100, wish I was there." And that note made me apply. Because for all of us, I think it's about having a connection. Yours was a coach, mine was Rosie. And if it wasn't for Rosie, she was the first person when I got to campus that I wanted to meet. And so much so that I volunteered, like, what do you need me to do? Like, I'm here, and I coordinated minority visitation weekend. And then I was one of the first of 2 students who became minority student recruiters. So as an undergrad, I worked in the admissions office, developing recruitment strategies for prospective students, and that was amazing. As an undergrad, I reactivated a lot of the Hispanic organizations because there really wasn't a collective group there wasn't a real strong identity among Latino students. And so there had been a Hispanic American organization, HAO. So we got HAO up and running. And my friend Cristina Gonzalez, who's from San Antonio, and I would coordinate a lot of the festivities. And I would cook. I would cook chalupas and tacos and enchiladas, whatever it took. And I'd get 80 people at a meeting, and so it was awesome. And I also co-founded Ballet Folklorico Azul y Oro with my friend Jesus Ramos, who was from Guadalupe, California. I was able to get $500 from the Office of Minority Affairs, and his mom made us 4 dresses and got us the shoes, and that's how we co-founded Ballet Folklorico Azul y Oro. I tended to be the Hispanic representative on a lot of Black student organizations, and I tell my friends that I learned leadership on this campus from my Black friends. Because they were organized, they were vocal, they had a way of making things happen, that us as Latinos sat silently and kind of invisible, and I was not okay with that. So I worked very hard at expressing my perspective and point of view, and not blending in as white passing since I didn't have an accent and since I wasn't poor. I am a 2nd generation college student. My parents were the migrant workers that overcame a lot of obstacles to give opportunities to us 4 children. Of the 4 of us, 3 of us are Domers. So I'm 89, Diana's 91, and David's 94. And then my youngest brother went on to Johnson & Wales, and he's a chef and businessman, so he's doing all right. There's a lot about leadership, but I think we also talk about how Notre Dame shaped my leadership perspective. So because of my very active involvement as an undergrad, I was asked by the Alumni Association to serve as an assistant director for alumni affairs, and I got to travel pretty extensively. That's also when they were just starting BA of ND. HA of ND came a few years later, and I worked with a lot of alumni groups, but that year was also a protest. That was also a great year because I was working at Notre Dame, Diana was a senior and we were roommates, and David was a freshman. So 1 year, all 3 of us were here at the same time. But there was a minority student uprising, and the director at the time was let go. And I did meet with him several times and tried to offer my advice, but so then Iris Outlaw, who is here, became the director, and I became the first assistant director for the Office of Multicultural Affairs. And that's really what started my pathway in my professional career. I do also want to acknowledge Dr. Roland Smith, who was executive assistant to Father Monk Malloy, who took me to breakfast as a very young professional and said, "You have a lot to offer higher ed. As a Latina and a leader, we need you in higher ed." And he's like, "You need a master's and a doctorate." I'm like, "Roland, you're crazy. I don't even want to admit my undergraduate GPA. I got a degree in leadership," is what I tell people. But I did love my history degree once I dropped accounting. So but that conversation changed my whole life. So that's why I went to get my master's and my doctorate, and I've worked in student affairs for the past 32 years. And I found the work of my heart. So I've been a dean of students for over 20 years, associate vice president, dean of students. I'm in my first vice president role in student success engagement at Texas A&M San Antonio. I made a commitment when I worked at Notre Dame. When I became assistant director, I realized where my Latino students begin college, and it is not at schools like Notre Dame. 85 to 90% of Latinos who access higher education are at community colleges and regional universities. And I said to myself, I gotta go. This is not where I belong. And so I have spent 23 years of my professional career at Hispanic serving institutions back home and right now in San Antonio. And probably my most painful experience, I loved working at Notre Dame. I forgot to say that in my Notre Dame identity, is I had the ideal college experience, and as did my brother and sister. I'm super crappy, I'm so sorry. But the students that I work with and work for don't have that opportunity. And so I try to spread those experiences at Hispanic serving, border serving institutions. My students at my campus are 80% Latino, 80% first gen, and 90% Pell eligible. What we fight is poverty for them to be able to access college. And that's the work of my heart.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Deswood Etzity, and thank you, Mark, for inviting me. And it's great to be with all of you. I'm class of 93, architecture, but I came in with the class of 92. The class of 88 was my fall semester. I'm not sure if anyone else is from that year. All right, there we go. Yes, I was from Kavanaugh Hall. They changed that to women's dorm. So I feel for my Lions brothers here. I felt very emasculated when I heard the news. I was like, oh, I can't be that annoying alumni strolling the halls anymore because they won't let me in the door anymore. I just wanted to say first, before I begin, that I am from the Navajo Nation. I'm representing myself, my tribe, as well as to give some input from the Native American indigenous perspective. I have friends here, close friends over the years that are from the Pokagon Potawatomi Band, and a dear friend from the Miami tribe as well, from the South Bend region. So in our way, we say, from my tribe, we say, "Ya e pene, she e to he blini nishna, ashi bashish chin totsot ni eshiche, toichitni e dat shinala." That's a little bit of my language, and that's a common and a formal greeting that tells you essentially where I'm from and my life story in a nutshell. And that's how Native people throughout the country, Canada and what's now called Mexico, indigenous people, that's the way we communicate. And a lot of times that's what bound us. And among a lot of Native people, that's how you establish a relationship. And from that point on, it was brother, sister, aunt, uncle. The names were totally secondary. It was more of a familial way of connecting with one another. So my Notre Dame family, that's the way I've always been greeted from day one here, and that's the way I've always felt. So I'm very honored to be here today. Like I said, I graduated in architecture in 93. And I came here with one goal, simply to build something of importance back in my homeland on the Navajo Nation. I grew up in a small town called Pinon, Arizona, and it's a very remote area of the Navajo Nation in the northeastern corner of Arizona, lacking just about everything you can think of as far as infrastructure, healthcare, education. And I grew up with my parents fighting for education and better education for our people in that region. We were in battle in a land dispute with the Hopi tribe nearby, and so we didn't get much funding for anything from our tribe, from the federal government, from the state. So it was a very interesting background to grow up in. However, a lot of our folks from that region, they did for themselves. You know, we worked the land. I grew up in a cattle ranching family. A lot of people had sheep, crops. And so I was raised with the mentality that we would say quite simply, it's up to me, it's up to us to do for ourselves. And growing up in that environment taught me a lot. So I'm one of those students that came here to Notre Dame. I wasn't, looking for a cause to fight for social justice, try to tackle racism, but I came here with with a good upbringing. And I found people like this beautiful person in here, Marty. People like Dolly Duffy, Mike Sullivan, people who've supported the indigenous people that are students here, as well as alumni, and as well as our work in the community. I really enjoyed what I did as a student in architecture because it allowed me to do exactly what I set out to do. I went back to the Navajo Nation. I settled into healthcare and worked extensively as a designer, construction, and as a consultant in planning projects. So now what I do in my current work is after 20 years of doing a lot of private sector work and work for my own tribe, I am a regional planning director in developing medical facilities for all the tribes in Nevada and Utah, and the majority of the tribes in Arizona, with the exception of my own. So I'm in touch with a lot of different people from a lot of different backgrounds. And that's one of the things about Native people that mainstream America doesn't really understand, is that they're all unique. Even myself, coming as a Native person, there's a lot of distrust. You know, other tribes, they look at me as I'm just the next bureaucrat coming into their doors, telling them the same thing that they've heard before. So there's a lot of work involved in me building relationships with tribes and different tribal governments. So I enjoy that because of the background I've had here working at Notre Dame, being educated here at Notre Dame, and just being around Native people and what they've taught me. So that's a little bit about me and the work that I'm continuing to do. My experience here working and studying with the School of Architecture has continued. I've had great support from the School of Architecture. And we recently had a pilot project that was featured on one of the What Would You Fight For series at halftime of one of the football games. So I've enjoyed a lot of things, every aspect about being a student and an alum of Notre Dame. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Turner. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently a research scientist at MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And I also serve as a director there for a center on anti-racism and technology design. In terms of my domerness, so Desmond, I am a Cabanati, so that's what we call ourselves now.
I was going to say that wasn't even a word.
Yeah.
It used to be Namen.
Now we're the chaos or the Cabanatis or whatever. So I always enjoyed during football weekends actually when male alum would come and be like, "Did you know this used to be a men's dorm?" And yes, I did. But actually, Kavanaugh was one of the few dorms that was set aside to be a dorm for women who were in the College of Engineering, which was a big thing. So I'm a Chegg, a chemical engineer, and some of my Cheggs are here from 2012. This is my 10-year region, so yeah. And I grew up in South Bend, actually. So I have African American, Italian, and Irish ancestry. My mom was an administrative assistant here for quite some time. So when I came to college, it was actually during the beginning of the recession. And so luckily at the time, Notre Dame had this thing where you could go if you had a parent that worked full time. And this is actually a very inclusive policy. I think you don't have to be a professor. You don't have to be a bigwig. You can be any full-time staff member, and if you worked there for a few years, I think it was 3 or 5 years at the time, your kids, if they got into Notre Dame, could go tuition free, which was a really big deal. So yeah, I did not come from the socioeconomic background that I think a lot of Notre Dame students came from, and nor the racial background, but I am Catholic. My faith has always been important to me. I taught CCD in high school to second graders preparing for their first communion and their first reconciliation. While I was at Notre Dame, I played the piano in my dorm mass every Sunday night which was a really fun and important experience for me. I would say that my experience at Notre Dame is interesting, especially because now I've followed kind of a traditional academia path professionally, where I've gone to graduate school, gotten a master's, a PhD, postdoc, and research scientist sort of thing. So I've had the opportunity to be at now 5 different institutions of higher ed. And what I think about when I think about my Notre Dame experience is that I was very, very lucky. I say that because I think that there were, maybe it was because, people knew my mom or people knew my family being in the area. Maybe because I happened to meet Professor McWilliams in the audience during the first week of freshman orientation. Maybe it's because I had the opportunity to work in the provost office with Provost Burrish. And as a student worker, because I was local. But I found myself sort of having, I will say that it was not the best 4 years of my life. It was not the easiest place to be an undergraduate for these sort of systemic inclusion-y types of reasons. But I was very lucky in that I had several mentors who, for whatever reason, decided that they wanted to be my mentor. So I was able to find a path through. And yeah, so in my work now, I'll say that I work on systemic inclusion and systemic equity in different types of systems, like higher ed or engineering systems like nuclear engineering or nuclear energy, and infrastructural systems like municipal disaster policy around the pandemic, for example. And I think when we talk about systemic inclusion, it's important to think it's really not necessarily about like the intent of the person or the intent of the people making the decision. I would say there were some policies at Notre Dame that I think probably had great intent, but they worked for about 85% of people at Notre Dame, but the 15% who they didn't work for, they really did work. And so I think, I love Notre Dame. I think it's a special place. It's been good to me and my family. And for me, when I love a place, that means I like to try and make it better. I like to think about, how it can become more perfect or more aligned with its mission. And I think that's a strong part of, my Catholic faith as well, right? Thinking about dignity and equity and things like that. But I will say that I'm really happy that this conversation is happening, and I'm so happy that all of you are here on a Saturday morning during your reunion. I really appreciate that. And yeah, I'll just say one anecdote. I would say like I think the best part of Notre Dame for me was my friends in chemical engineering. And we had, it was so hard. We had like so many ridiculous problem sets. It seemed like they just never ended, and projects, and we didn't really have any room for electives in our schedule or anything like that. But, every like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we would meet in the engineering library and do our problem sets until 2 in the morning or try to do them. But I will say that what was interesting was that so a lot of my friends in chemical engineering were also women minorities as well. And many of us were told we should not do engineering by professors, by Notre Dame professors. And we all became engineers, and some of us are now doctors and all of that. But yeah, it's just something to think about. If I had not had the mentors that I had and the friends that I have, I probably wouldn't be an engineer. And I think that systemically, I don't know if Notre Dame could we kind of supported each other, right? So yeah, I think about that when I think about how it can become better and how it can become the best. So thanks.
Good morning. You've heard a long slew of, wonderful people. I'm Shalene Bai, and I'm the class of 2020. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana, and as said in my bio, my mom's from St. Croix, my dad's from Cameroon. Growing up in my neighborhood was like a really diverse place. So when I was going off to college, looking for college campuses, diversity was something that I was looking for. The neighbors to the left of me are Jewish and white. We call them aunt and uncle. The neighbors to the back of us are African Americans, and they've been there, like their family has been in the United States for generations and generations. The neighbors across the street are also white Americans, and we would always go over there. They would like help us fix our place. Like we would just like share in community. So that was like what true community looked like for me. So when I was going to apply for colleges, I was kind of unsure of what that kind of looked like. My parents came here for college. So for me, it was like, what does this look like? I typed in Google the top 20 places for happy people, and Notre Dame was on the list. So, I was like, Notre Dame? Isn't that the football school? So most of my places that I applied to were in Indiana because I have a twin sister. And so for convenience sake, when it came to graduation, Lord knows that was not even necessary because of the pandemic. So my sister and I both went to school in Indiana. Ultimately, it came down to financial aid. And the statement of Notre Dame, I honed in on the common good. We're committed to the common good. So at the end of the day, I chose Notre Dame and the journey began. So I entered as a biology and Africana studies double major, and that's what I graduated as. But when I think of Notre Dame, I think too, the word that comes to mind is interesting. That's the best way to explain. So I was expecting, it's a place for happy people. Freshman year, I was like, but where's my happiness? It was a place where a lot of people could be happy, but at times I felt lost. So I was involved in a lot of things. My freshman year, I walked onto the Notre Dame rowing team. Because of that, a couple of my closest friends also came from that experience. But what happened freshman year was my reality that the world is not made for me. The world is not necessarily created for people that look like me, that come from backgrounds like I do. I understand what true diversity is, and when you slap diversity onto lots of posters and brochures, you expect that diversity means that when you enter into a space, you're okay, you're going to be accepted, you're going to be understood. But that wasn't exactly what always happened. And so Notre Dame is interesting because I too have grown to love this place. If not for Notre Dame, I wouldn't have had the experiences that I had. I got to travel. I got to go to California. I got to go to spend summers in St. Louis. I got to go to Ghana. Cameroon is always a place that I've wanted to go, but because of the civil war there, it's not a reality of a place that I can travel. Unfortunately, I don't speak my dad's tribal language, so they will know that I'm American. So I've gotten to travel to Uganda. All of these sorts of experiences have shaped who I am and made me appreciate the background from which I come. But I never thought that I would spend so much time questioning my worth and my value. So when we think of systems and structures, it's important to think of how people can not only enter but exist. And so as a biology and Africana studies double major, I did have a professor in biology who said, maybe you wouldn't struggle so much if you dropped Africana studies. Why is it that important to you? But in fact, if I didn't have both of those majors together, I wouldn't be able to put in conversation things that exist as our reality in the world. Public health is a system that we all know has kind of in some ways teetered back and forth throughout these last 2 years especially. But I don't think I would understand it as much as I do if I didn't have those two majors. But relationships is what got me through. So like, I'm very grateful for all my mentors, again, who like poured into me, and I feel that need to pour back into my own community. But like Dr. McKenna, Mama Outlaw, Papa McWilliams, those are people who have helped shape who I am and the reason why I think and I can exist as me. So
I don't know if I've moderated a panel with everyone who is so succinct and so respectful of the time. I'm supposed to be managing the time, and I don't really have much to do here. So we're going to go to our kind of next question for reflection is to what Notre Dame needs to focus on to do better. If I'm hearing a common thread across all five panelists, it's this sense that each person has been able to find a support system, a set of mentors who has helped them through either through sports or through Africana Studies or the Institute for Latino Studies or whatever it is that complements what it is that you're trying to do. And so perhaps we can reflect more on how we can strengthen those things. As Shalene was reflecting, something came to mind that my colleague Maria McKenna said to me some years ago when we were talking about a student and her internship project. She had taken a class with me and she had done fine, but it was very clear both within the class and in our one-on-one conversations that she was just kind of surviving Notre Dame. She wasn't thriving. I have conversations with her and she just say, you know, Dr. Siemens, I'm just trying to get out of here. I'm just trying to get my degree and get on with my life. And I related this to Dr. McKenna, and she said to me a phrase that has really stuck with me. She said, too often, particularly for Black students, Notre Dame picks them, but they don't pick Notre Dame. That is, you know, we have a financial package for them, we receive them, but we don't have all of the support necessary for them to thrive, or as Shalene was saying, for them not to feel lost, but to feel fully a member and a part of this community. And so maybe we can reflect more on the ways in which Notre Dame can do that better. So Dr. Hurd, would you like to start?
Well, as I've mentioned about the situation being paired roommates freshman year, I don't know that, you know, racism is still alive and well. You need to know that. I'm still racially profiled. I have a master's degree from MIT. I have a medical degree. I practiced eye surgery for 36 years. And I've been all over Africa doing missionary work. And I can still walk into an operating room with my scrubs on. Walk into an operating room, not an operating room, but a dressing room. Now this was years ago before I retired. With scrubs on, getting ready to do a case, and one of the white doctors say, "How can I help you? You know, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, if you want to help me with this case, I mean, you know." No, but that's I guess that's not really answering your question, but the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, racism is still a bad scar in America, and I'm not sure how Notre Dame can address it. When I was a student here, my freshman year, there were only 7 or 8 Black students in my class, it was a culture shock for me, but we survived. And my support system was my track teammates was my support system. Mark Walsh, and a number of guys. We still keep in touch with each other. We just went and visited one of our track teammates in Norway, and that's one of the things about coming to Notre Dame. You get lifelong friends and relationships, and I'm very happy to have that.
I was very impressed because I never, as an undergrad, would have imagined that there would be an Institute for Latino Studies at Notre Dame. So it makes my heart feel very proud that there is such a thing. I know that there is a decent representation of Latinos. I learned when I was working in multicultural affairs that actually at the time there were twice as many Latinos as there were African American students on campus. I don't think anybody knows that. So we're pretty invisible. Again, sometimes because we aren't well organized and don't use our voices to advocate for issues that pertain to us. I was really proud to hear recently from a young alumnus that my sister and I and my friend Astrid from Puerto Rico started the Spanish Mass in Farley Hall once a month. And I understand that Spanish Mass is celebrated weekly, including Holy Days of Obligation at multiple chapels throughout campus, and that made my heart super happy. I also understood that Ballet Folklorico does dances from more than 2 regions in Mexico and other regions, other states, and that made my heart happy. So there definitely is progress. But there are a lot of small issues of racism that happen all the time, which I think make Latino students cringe. For me, one issue is immigration. And this mantra of build a wall is so hurtful because we are a nation of immigrants. So what you're saying is keep out brown immigrants, because that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And that's my raza, and that makes me angry. But I do appreciate that Notre Dame, through the Center for Social Concerns and other entities, maybe has these very painful conversations, uncomfortable conversations about what it means. Why does white privilege allow you to get on a microphone and profess this as the truth for all Americans? Because that's just not okay. So my family, I come from a very political family. We were always campaigning. And I've tried to teach that to my children because some of these things I'm just very passionate about. But what else is said like that, maybe quietly between people? Like women don't belong as engineers. And those things are very painful and they set us back miles. Maybe it's imposter syndrome, maybe it's, I don't know what. I'm very grateful that my parents built a strong sense of ego, values, Catholicism, and just kind of overall well-being. I can hear criticism and comments and say, well, that's how you feel. That's not, I don't own that. And yet, when I was a dean of students at LSU, I kept waiting for somebody to say the only reason I got that job was because I was Latina. And it never got said, but that goes back to imposter syndrome, because why would a Latina be a dean of students at a predominantly white campus in the SEC? And it was a very unfriendly campus for other reasons. For example, Latinos represented 5% of the population in Louisiana, so it basically didn't count. I tried to bring up gender issues, it's like, not an issue here, gone. Like, okay, so it's really hard to survive and thrive. And I remember having conversations at Notre Dame where people's like, oh, I don't see you as Hispanic. Again, because maybe it's your maid or your groundsman that you think of, the busboy. But Latinos look always shapes and sizes, and they are here for the American dream as well. And so I don't know how you fix that except for one person at a time. We are as many different cultures here as there are people in this room. We are all diversity. And I felt that my purpose in having 3, young men as children, that I can affect them. Who they are as citizens and people is where I can make the greatest contribution. I think Notre Dame can do that. If they see us all as their children in this Notre Dame familia, spend time growing and nurturing those young people.
I always felt very fortunate to be a part of Notre Dame because of Notre Dame's reach and the platform, the brand, whatever you want to call it. You know, people love Notre Dame throughout the world. One of my best stories was coming out of school. I went to work construction. I was living out of my truck and on a job site, enjoying my work. And a guy who was from the town, local town that I was in, Latino man, said, "Hey, you're a Notre Dame guy. You can come live at my house." And this guy was not a Notre Dame alum or grad. He just said, "I grew up with Notre Dame in my family. You come stay with me." He put me up. The rest is history. But the thing about this guy that was so great was that he got to know me. He understood what I was about and where I was going. And he knew the importance, at least as he told me, it's important that I do this or try to help you with what you're doing. But that's just the connection that Notre Dame has with people. I think as an alum, that's one of the most proudest moments and experiences that I've had is the way Notre Dame has impacted people, not just us former students. But going back to the question about areas of improvement for Notre Dame is that because they have this voice, I've always looked to Notre Dame to be that one place, that partner, that ally that could really understand Native people, indigenous people. We go way back, you know, here in this country, way back. And with the Catholics, we go way back, 1492 and then some. So anthropologists will tell you that, you know, Native indigenous people have been here since 15,000, 20,000 years ago, whatever, you know, but if we're talking 15, 20,000 years, you know, and if it's somewhere about this long, you know, the immigration since 1493 is something like that, okay? So there's a lot of things that we do as indigenous people. There's a lot of ways that we have, ways of living that don't jive with mainstream society. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're so misunderstood, compounded by the fact that we've endured severe pandemics that decreased our numbers. And probably one of our most weakest moments, our land was taken, our rights were taken. We've had all kinds of atrocities committed before our eyes. And it's interesting watching, and it's sad to see what's happening in Ukraine. But as I envision that and I listen to recall the stories of my great-grandparents, those are the stories that they told. They told me, that's where you got your name. My name, it comes from a prisoner who survived, a little boy who survived being imprisoned, marched across the state of New Mexico, imprisoned there for 4 years, and survived to come back. You carry his name. But that's our reality these days, is we're still coming out of that. And the people you see in Ukraine, they're going to have these long-term effects in generations to come. And that's one thing about Native people that folks don't realize here in the United States. I have a conversation with somebody recently about this, and they said, well, you guys got your casinos now. You're all right, right? and they were, this person was cutting my hair. I think they were looking for a big tip or something like that. I was like, no. I said, I wish that was the case, but no. But one thing that's funny about it is that even if we did, and some tribes are doing really well, you know, economically with the incorporation of their casino industries. But even if we did, you know, a lot of us Native people, and for my tribe in particular, you know, that's not going to solve everything for us. You know, our way of living involves so much as far as just our strive for balance in life. It's one of our guiding principles. In one word, we call it hojon. It's balance. You know, no amount of money is going to fix that for us. We have to have it, you know, in our lives now, you know, educationally, spiritually, healthcare-wise, and in sync with the environment. And we still strive for that today. And our ideals don't always align with mainstream America. And that's the hard part, is getting people to understand that. They think, oh, you're impoverished, you're poor, you don't get it, work harder. It's like, well, we never really signed up for that from the beginning, you know? We have our own way of life, and a good life consists of different principles. And so I go back and forth between that. And a lot of Native people do go back and forth between that. And here at this university, one of my goals was to try to help administrators, faculty, alumni, people from the alumni office, to better understand that. And in the hopes that the university and admissions will continue to find good representatives of Native communities, people who will benefit from the education here. You know, I've been very lucky. You know, my time here was extraordinary, and the people here, I think the key people here, understood that about me. I forgot to mention Iris Outlaw, who's one of the strongest advocates I had backing me, and they understood that about me and set me on my way. And my goal was get my degree, get that piece of paper, and get out there and start building. And so that's one thing I'm hopeful for, that Notre Dame will continue to try to better their understanding of Indigenous people, continue to be a partner, and be that voice that we need. That's all.
Okay, so how can Notre Dame be better? Maybe some of y'all have probably seen the movie Hidden Figures. There's this like really interesting moving plot point where one of the main characters, she has to walk 20 minutes each way to go to the bathroom, right? And that's absurd, right? But also nobody in that building realized for a long time that, you know, some people did and they were kind of like, yeah, you got to walk over there. I'm not talking to those people. I'm talking to the people who are like, oh, we had no idea that you had to walk 20 minutes to go each way to the bathroom, right? So that's how systemic exclusion works, right? There are some people, and again, you know, those people I'm not trying to convince, right? But there are some people who are like, yeah, you know, you should have to be over here, and we're going to be over here. But the majority of us, and I suspect everyone in this room, is in the category of like, wait, like, just tell, you know, how do we include, right? And you have to recognize that that's really how it works. It's oftentimes not this policy that's like, maybe at one time it was, right? Maybe at one time the intent was to exclude, but the relic of that policy exists today. And today, as a society, we have vastly different values with regards to that. We've come a long way, right, in terms of that. I once did a visiting stint at Caltech in Pasadena, and a professor there who is a woman talked about how in her building they didn't have a women's bathroom, right? So like, this is and how like, you know, her colleagues who were mostly men would be like, oh, you know, we want to get more women here. We want to get more women here. And like, finally, I guess she spoke up in a faculty meeting and was like, it'd be great if I didn't have to walk to the other side of the campus to use the bathroom, right? So there's these like little signaling things that you can do. So I have 3 anecdotes from Notre Dame that I think kind of illustrate how like systemic exclusion or inclusion kind of works. And one is in the dorms. So my sister Taylor is class of 2014 as well, and we both lived in Kavanaugh. And her freshman year, my junior year, she, you know, was paired with a random roommate, a girl who was from rural Pennsylvania. And my sister is a soccer player, so she, you know, while she was there, Notre Dame won the national championship, and, you know, they went to the Final Four many times. And my sister, as a soccer player, had lots of posters of soccer people or people playing soccer on her side of the room. And one was the poster of Bob Marley playing soccer. It's this like famous photograph, you've probably all seen it, right, of him kicking a soccer ball around. Well, her roommate, without talking to her, without asking, and just saying like, you know, what is this, reported my sister to the RA for posting drug paraphernalia in the room. And what I want to say is that the RA took that seriously, right? Now, if her roommate had posted a picture of Bob Dylan or the Grateful Dead in her room, would that have been drug paraphernalia? I really doubt it, right? So the point is, the RA was not trained to be able to respond to that and say, hey, I understand your concern. I suggest you talk to your roommate. This is not actually like what, this isn't that. But I find that troubling, especially in light of the fact that Notre Dame recently, like in the last couple of years, said they wanted students to live on campus basically the whole time, 6 semesters or 8 semesters. Because I think about systemically, who does that policy harm, whether it's intentional or not? Imagine if, my sister told me about that and I was able to go talk to the RA and be like, hey, this is ridiculous, please, but if she was alone, if she was from a place where she didn't have advocates, right, that could have really changed her trajectory as a student, to have this girl who is living with her and this is supposed to be her home under the dome, report her behind her back for having a poster of a music artist playing soccer as a soccer player, right? So I think if Notre Dame wants to talk about home under the dome, there really needs to be commitments to making sure that students from backgrounds that represent, as Maddie said, this plurality of what a child of Notre Dame looks like, right? We're not all Catholic, we're not all white, we're not all from upper middle class backgrounds. There's a plurality of us, right? And so you can't have policies that work for most of us, because then who it's not working for, that directly contributes to why you have issues, right? A second example is, and Maddie, you reminded me of this actually, was regarding masses. So once a month when I was in undergrad, we had the Rejoice Mass, which was Mass in the African American tradition. It was a Catholic Mass. Father Jenkins used to come a lot too. It was really a beautiful Mass. And there was some pushback because the music was different in this Mass. And the parts of Mass were exactly the same, right? It was we still open, we still have the readings, we still have the sermon, we still, the liturgy of the Eucharist, et cetera, but the music was different. And people complained about that and said, well, we just want us all to have the same music because this difference is actually hurtful to our Catholic identity, right? And that's baloney, yeah. And again, Notre Dame was systemically equipped to take that complaint seriously, but the students who led Rejoice Mass every week, were they empowered to be thank you, but no, this is, here's, go educate yourself, here's some information, whatever. Yeah, and so then the third example I'll use is in my path as a research scientist and an academic. So I know that Notre Dame aspires to be a premier research institution of the top 10 caliber, the top Catholic research institution in the world. And for some of you might not know, a research institution means a specific thing. It means, you have to have a certain amount of students getting PhDs, you have to have a certain amount of money coming in from grants and from research and things like that, which is different than, say, a liberal arts college, which focuses primarily on undergrad education, right? So every school that, I've gone to get my degrees and work at has been a research institution, and they all have systemic policies and funding in place for undergraduate students to access things like undergraduate research opportunities or undergraduate internships. And when I say systemic, because I know Notre Dame, I did research at Notre Dame, and I know people who did internships and things like that, but when I say it's easy, at MIT, I don't have to pay to host undergrads in my lab. So I don't have to, it doesn't come out of my grants, it doesn't come out of money that I've raised. It's just something that the institution says, every semester you can have 2 to 3 undergrads work with you. And so that creates a situation where it's not costing me anything. So I can then send out a call and recruit, and I can get students apply, and they see that my work is about race and equity, and I get a lot of students from underrepresented backgrounds who then have a research experience from MIT on their on their resume. And that is an experience that translates tangibly to a job or to a graduate program, right? So I think, and that was true at Stanford, where I did my PhD, that's true at Harvard, it's true at Michigan as well. And so I think, if Notre Dame wants to systemically become both inclusive and a top-tier research institution, we need to be serving our undergrads better, right? So many of us have the story of like working with students, whether it's NSB or Hispanic Students Association, or I don't even know if there was a Asian Students Association, right? But like we, at a lot of schools who are research institutions and who are more inclusive, like students don't have to do this legwork. They don't have to like go and spend hours every week trying to get the university to recognize Juneteenth or whatever it is, or to give them a room to organize, right? There are staff who already have made sure like that's happening, and students can focus on their research, their studies, their internships, and things like that. So I would say like from a high level, like top-down academic level, I think it would be wonderful, for example, if there was like, and a fund, whether it's an endowment or whatever, that any student could apply to, every semester to be a research to do research in a professor's lab, right? That doesn't cost a lot of money. I think I made like $3,000 in a summer doing research, but professors don't. Professors have to budget and sort of like put together everything. So $3,000. If it's coming from a $100,000 grant and the university is taking some of that for overhead and things like that, you're probably not going to want to invest in an undergrad. You're just going to want to put that towards something else where there's a higher probability of return. So I think, just those three things are my end.
Shirley, I'm going to interrupt just for a second. I just want to remind you all that the cards are available. Some of you all have been filling them out. If you filled out a card or you want one to be submitted, please just raise your hand and one of the Lions will come and collect it. Excuse me, go ahead.
I just want to acknowledge that I love anecdotes because they like help put things into perspective. People who don't walk in your shoes. I just want to say thank you. I love anecdotes. So, how to make the university a better and more inclusive place. So just start with a piggyback. So I was president of Voices of Faith Gospel Choir. If you know, you know. So I've been a member of Voices of Faith since I was a freshman. When I entered as a freshman, it was like this very robust, large group, very, very diverse. But over the years, it kind of like dwindled in size. And so, like when I think of traditional like clubs and things that have been on campus for a very, very long time, like I think about how alumni come back and they stand in line to wait for tickets for those events. But then when I think of Voices, it's like, who's supporting? Who made up Voices? And it was predominantly like brown and particularly Black people, like as a gospel choir. But there are other alumni too, alumni and alumni. And the support just looks different. So it's like we have to like, investment in clubs often comes from like how much can the students raise for that club. But if that doesn't work, then the club kind of dwindles, it kind of fails. So there has to be a part like from somebody else who has money to like pour into certain clubs and things like that. Also from a university perspective, there are certain events on campus that get pushed more than others, ones that look more traditional, like that have been here for a very long time, all those sorts of things. Another thing is, I think we need to acknowledge student leaders. Like to be a student is hard enough. To be like a student and invested in all of these clubs that build and help shape communities that help students feel comfortable on campus is exhausting. Yet you're expected to, perform on exams, do this sorts of things. and volunteer. Oh, and make time to like have some sort of social life that like continues and goes with you for the rest of your life. But it's exhausting and it takes time away from like your work as a like just a student in general. So we only have a finite amount of energy, not infinite. And I think at times you're expected, well, if you want that, you go get it. But that's not always possible. So I think student leaders, particularly in communities that don't make up the larger image of what Notre Dame is, white and maybe not so much as much male, but I think they need to be celebrated. I think professors who like also push into those communities also need to be celebrated. Yes, it's like professors need to do this and support. Well, professors have families, they have papers to write, they have lectures to prepare for, all these sorts of things. Another thing that comes to mind is that navigating the Notre Dame network. Like the Notre Dame network has worked for me. Like I'm very grateful, but everybody hasn't had that privilege. And particularly for minority females, the Notre Dame network does not work in your favor. Like just being a man, like changes a lot of things. So when people say, oh, you should have the Notre Dame network, you should be able to fall back on this, that's not the reality and it's still not. So I think teaching people how to navigate the network, I think that would be a good start. What that looks like, I'm not sure. And then another thing that comes to mind is this idea of what an ally is versus a co-conspirator. We have a lot of allies. Thank you. But to be an ally, you can say, oh, you can watch a TV show and be like, oh, I know about that. You can say all the jargon. You can maybe throw around some slogans. But to say that you're going to stand with, stand for, go down, tumble, get some bruises, scars, end up someplace you don't want, that's not always what an ally is. Co-conspirators are people who are not just going to stand. It's like, oh, I'm going to help you up, and if I get in trouble, that's okay too. Ally is a comfortable term. And I realize that a lot of people just like to be comfortable. We do things that make us comfortable, and we don't have hard conversations. You attend conversations, but you don't engage in them. You listen, but you don't take what you hear. So like I think a lot of times Notre Dame allows you to be comfortable. Like you can exit Notre Dame and still be ignorant. The amount of people that graduate from Notre Dame and don't realize that the world is not all wealthy is problematic. Like I'm from the middle class and I'm very, very grateful. So that in and of itself is a privilege. But to say that you go into a place and you're going to exit the world and become a better place means that you have to step out of the box that you grew up in. But we're still comfortable. So I think those are the things that I think need to change. Like we teach people how to be comfortable, but unfortunately the world does not require that. In order to make change, you can't be comfortable. So
We have officially about 15 minutes or so for questions and answers, but we can go past 11:30 if panelists are willing and you all want to stay. At 11:30, of course, certainly leave at any time. We have more questions than we'll be able to review, and so I'm just going to pick out a few. But everyone, I haven't even been able to read all of them yet. All the ones I've read thus far are really thoughtful and rich, and so I'm trying to think through a process by which IRR can begin to respond to these questions. And for perhaps a first step would be to post them. You wouldn't include your names if you don't want your names included. Some of you all did put your name on here. So that we can continue to have this conversation. As I intimated before, we hope that this particular form of a forum we can implement on a regular basis. And so I'll just start off with a couple of questions. But before I do, Shalene, when you were talking, it just reminded me of a student I heard speak years ago when I was at Emory University. This was a rally for the LGBTQ community. And one of the students said, you know, if you're comfortable, you're just not doing enough. And I really appreciated you reminding me of that with your comments. This is one question specifically for Dr. Turner. Tell us about the MIT approach to inclusion, and please, is there hope for Notre Dame?
Yes, there's hope. Yeah, I would say that MIT and other schools like it just have a really like top-down and bottom-up approach. And it's not to say that things are perfect. There are still there are incidents at MIT, but a lot of times the incidents are coming from, you know, they're stopped before they blow up, right? So if you have like a student in the dorm saying something ridiculous or posting something ridiculous and racist or inflammatory, the staff and RAs and administrators are really trained to handle that. So it doesn't become this like hand wringing of like, oh gosh, like what should we do? Like, do we need to give this person a platform? You know, like, no, it's just, we have our values, we state them, whatever. But I do think it honestly comes down a lot to funding and resources as well, and just making it very obvious. Like, so, I mean, a lot of us shared like a path that we found to make it through Notre Dame, right? So maybe, and like, but at schools like MIT or Stanford or Harvard, like you don't have to find a path. There's just signs everywhere that say like, oh, hey, are you interested in this? Apply here. Are you interested in this? Apply here. Are you interested in this? And money is never an option or never a problem, right? So like, I have a student that I've mentored the last 2 years, and like she's getting a funded trip to South Africa this summer, and like they emailed her to apply. You know, MIT was like, oh hey, like, you know, we're sending this out to all of the students in this dorm or whatever, right? And you know, I was able to hire her as a student because I didn't have to, you know, the institution and the department was paying for it, right? I didn't have to take it out of my NSF or out of my DOE grant, right? So I think there's a lot of just resources and well-placed advertising. And so you know, when I was a student, like the question for me and for a lot of my friends in similar backgrounds was not like, should I apply to this? It was like, well, can I afford this? Like, am I going to have to take an extra semester to do this experience? Like, how am I going to pay for that? With research, it was really interesting because like a lot of students were, you know, doing undergrad research is really important for things like med school or grad school. But so a lot of times the professor could only, you know, due to funding constraints, for example, have like one student at a time. And they always wanted the best student in their class, right? And so it was like, you had to take their class and, you know, in chemical engineering, that was very constrained. Like we all took the same classes, and, you know, maybe the person you want to do research with is in a different department. But like at MIT, if you want to do research, you just apply. You don't have to take the person's class. It's like a website, the undergrad experience board or whatever, and you apply, you interview, I can interview whoever I want. I don't have to say to them like, oh, well, there's a 3-semester waiting list because you need to take my class first and you need to get an A in that class. Like, I think just systemically, MIT tries to like set its students up for success and make it easy for them to do whatever. Make it easy, because the thing is like internships, undergrad experiences, research experiences, they're kind of like train tickets, right? And so you need to make it, the job of the university, I think, is you need to make it easy for your students to like accumulate those train tickets so that they can get on the train to whatever their next stop is. And so that's kind of how I think of it.
Thank you. And here's a question for the entire panel. Please don't feel like everyone needs to respond to this, but if you have a response, please just let me know. We all want to see Notre Dame as a truly inclusive community. How can we measure progress? What does it look like if, in fact, we're making progress, making improvements? How would we know?
Are there any climate studies for students about what their experience is like, focus groups and those kinds of things? I mean, that's really what you want to know. What's it like? When I've met some young alumni, I'm sitting there like, wow, you're so lucky. I didn't have that when I was, so I'm jealous. And yet I know that there are still things that happen. But I think, climate studies for students, what does it really, and then disaggregate it by ethnicity and by gender, focus groups where you get the real story, what's really behind this trend and what do we see. I think people have talked about mentoring, and I think that's really important. And even alumni weekend, I'm here because Hispanic alumni are having a reunion and we're having a pachanga tonight. I'm like, okay, so I'll go do this and then I'll go do that, and I'm looking forward to that. So, but I think you can't just focus on underrepresented students. You need to, focus on white students and what that is like. Because I was a roommate with a girl from New Jersey, and we were really quite different. But I took friends home to South Texas for spring break because I was right by South Padre, and back then there was a very big spring break place. But it was also on the border, and they went to Spanish Mass, and the priest always introduced my 10 white girlfriends that were at Mass with us, and they didn't understand a word, but they liked the music, and they liked all the other stuff, and then they'd go home and eat breakfast tortillas with frijoles, and my aunt would go, you can lick your fingers, it's okay, just use a napkin afterwards, kind of stuff, and they realized that my stories were real when they went home with me. So, and yet my college roommate I had not spoken to since about 2 years after we graduated, because she made a comment about the equal opportunity Black law student that was in her class. I'm like, so scam done. I lived with you for 3 years and you think you can still make a comment like that to me? I'm not gonna spend any more energy on you. I don't know where she is. Because that was just very painful for me that I didn't make an impact on her. That's how I felt. So I think it's important to hear the voice of underrepresented students, but then what is the voice of white students, and how are they willing to be the change?
I just have one thing to add on top of what you said, is that I think a lot of times we measure things by how much we give. So like oftentimes we like identify, oh, we are giving resources, we give this many opportunities, but how do people use them? I think a lot of we have a lot like social concerns. There are lots of grants now like that, opportunities that did not exist before, but there's so much now that it's even more overwhelming to navigate. So I think on top of focus groups and things like that, it's we have to go back to data, but bring it back away from how much is available to people. If you can't use it, then it's kind of useless. So just on top of what you said.
One of the things that shocks me about this place, and I'm proud and then I'm sad, is there are twice, if not 3 times as many buildings on this campus, and not that many more students. So my campus of 6,800 students does not have a classroom like this. My campus doesn't have a student union. I'm not kidding. I played the lottery not only for my retirement, but to build a student union on the campus that I'm at. We don't have a gym. We don't have a room bigger than that can hold 400 people. The next size room is 200 people. And then we have 3 rooms that hold 100 people. So I'm just sitting here like, if I had that kind of money at an HSI serving South Bexar County and South San Antonio, South Texas, so if anybody wants to make a gift to Texas A&M, I would love to entertain that. But it is just overwhelming how much money and resources. And I love the Fighting Irish stories. I love the nanotechnology. I love the and I'm just so proud. But then I think, God, they have so much, and we have nothing.
To reply. We are almost at 11:30. this is for the entire panel as well. And so maybe I'll voice this as the last official question. We'll have answers, and then if we want to continue, we'll figure that out. And that'll be unofficial after the time is up. Could you comment on the role of mentors and allies and the significance of minority peers, it says, versus administrators?
Yeah, I think it's very important that at all levels of the university, so, from the students to the administrative staff, the research staff, the faculty, the board of trustees or whatever, I think it's important to have, if you're saying that diversity or inclusion is one of your values, you have to show that. I do think Notre Dame has an interesting space that it occupies, right, where the church is structured, the church structures a lot of the university, so we're not going to have a president of Notre Dame who's a woman, right, because the president is a priest, right? And I think in the dorms as well, we have the dorm leadership oftentimes are who tend to be mentors sometimes are priests or nuns or just, sometimes lay people as well, but you have to be unmarried. You have to be Catholic, and so I think because we have it's interesting, right? Because Catholicism is this worldwide religion, and there are people of all skin colors and all ethnicities that practice Catholicism. So I would challenge, I think sometimes the university tries to use this, the Catholic thing as this crutch, but billions of people practice Catholicism all over the world, in all the hemispheres. And so I think I would push on that because I do think it's very important. When I thinking about MIT, at all levels, whether it's the provost, the vice presidents, the professors, the students, the staff, there is diversity. You don't have to find the one professor. Not every Black student is gonna talk to Iris or Leo because there's maybe 30 professors or staff that have a similar identity and can resonate, right? So I do think that's important.
I think to continue building off of what Dr. Turner said, is that we have a lot of administration that works in the shadows. That's just the reality. If you're not going to put in the hard work or be willing to be the face of what change looks like, then I don't know, you're not a leader. And so I think our leadership doesn't look as diverse as it needs to be, but is that a space that Black and brown people even want to enter? We're so comfortable with what tradition looks like that people who ultimately get the say-so or the ability to make the decisions don't like to make changes that actually impact that large. It's we like to chip away. So it's just chopping, so I think in terms of administration, I also think it's important to think about and look at how many Black and brown professors we're keeping. We can attract them, but we're not keeping them. I think that also proves that the climate, yes, onto an outsider, things look okay. We have a very good job of packaging things, but we can't even keep brown and Black professors. So that should say something. So I think from a top down, I think looking at professors is the next step. But then I think looking at our administration, our provosts, are also putting people in position who are going to say the hard things. We like to oh, you're the face that will not tell us how you really feel, but you're still Black or brown. That's great. No.
You young people are so bright.
It's 11:32, and some of you all might have other things on your schedule. So please don't feel as though it's disruptive to get up and leave. That's perfectly fine. I am going to ask one more question, and if you all are willing to stay a few more minutes and address this one more, and as I said, we'll figure out a way in which we can continue this conversation.
Questions live from the audience.
We're technically not set up for that. We're live streaming, and so people can't hear you.
I've got a microphone.
Oh, okay. If you can take a microphone to this woman here.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I just find that, like, when you talk directly with, the audience, that really has an impact. Anyway, my name is Lisa Boykin. I graduated in 1988. I also went to law school after Notre Dame, graduated of NYU Law School. Diversity is, being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance, right? And I feel like I can't believe all these years later, it's the same conversation. When I was at Notre Dame, I was one of 10 Black women in my class. I think when we look at experiences of Black alumni, look around the room. How many Black alumni are at reunion? And that's something that me and my 4 Black roommates from Notre Dame here were talking about, because as we were going to events, we were saying, what can be done to shake this reunion situation up and not just relegate, we'll pay attention to Black alumni when it's a Black alumni reunion, but to really engage alumni of color with the students, with the university. A lot of Black alumni are just simply checked out. And I feel like the programming that we do, this conversation, by the way, is amazing. And I am so grateful to all of you for it today. It's the first time I've ever come to a reunion where a conversation like this about diversity and inclusion was had. And the members of the class of 1972 were marketing this extensively. I found out about it, through Leo. By the way, I met Leo when I was in 12th grade. This man right here has been mentoring students forever. But it shouldn't just be the responsibility of Iris Outlaw and Leo and the Black people to mentor the Black people. It's the white people have to be engaged and accountable and vested in creating an inclusive environment here at Notre Dame. And that's something when people say, well, what can we do? We've talked about the problem. What can we do? Make people accountable, educate if there's an issue in the dorms with the rectors and the RAs, educate those people, educate the students about inclusion and diversity, make administrators accountable for how many diverse faculty do we have that we recruit and retain. There are things that can be measured. There are incentives that can be put in place for people to care about these issues. We can reimagine how we do reunion to attract alumni of color to come back, to be engaged with the university, to be engaged with the current students to help them through this experience. So anyway, I just wanted to offer that, but I'm very concerned about the lack of engagement and the university's not really acknowledging that on the part of alumni of color.
Thank you for your comments. Would anyone like to respond?
I would. I graduated again in 1969, and I made some phone calls 3 years ago when we had our 50th reunion, and I couldn't get very many guys to come back, except for the athletes. Some of them had bad experiences, racial experiences. And so it was not all rosy. So you mentioned, why don't you get more Black alumni to come to participate? Some of them had bad experiences here. And that's not, my oldest son, for example, he was one, he transferred from Notre Dame to Xavier in New Orleans, second year, because of some racial climate issues. So it's not all good. Sad to say, but you've heard some good points here, especially from the younger alumni. Some things to focus on, and I think this should be taken to heart.
I'd just like to also respond and say that I would agree with you, Dr. Hurd. That is the experience of many Native students, and there aren't very many of us to begin with, but those in my time trying to involve and engage with them through the Alumni Association, it's difficult because so many of them didn't have good experiences. I consider myself one of the exceptions, but it's just difficult, and this is why I keep going back to this. What I think are more foundational levels of understanding. And it's unique with indigenous people, but it's probably very similar with Latinos and Black people. But for us, indigenous people, Christianity and Catholicism has, from day one, said and established among people that we are subhuman. We're not even looked at as human beings. And that has been prevalent for so many years. And so when you come into an environment like this, I was equipped, I think, well equipped to be in this environment, but a lot of my peers weren't, and they still felt that way. They felt that when they were here, and they didn't feel that they weren't able to enjoy that connection because of it. So that's why I'm still really advocating for the university to try to have a better understanding and voice that. And I was still thankful that I had a roommate. My roommate was Korean, and an Irish Catholic kid, white kid from Philly. And the white kid from Philly was just dynamite. He met me at every level and supported me. I tried to support him. And we learned a lot from each other. And to this day, I think that you talk about diversity and inclusion. That guy, he was that, for me. He really made me feel part of it. And I kind of wonder why everyone didn't have that same experience that I did, at Notre Dame. But yeah, it is difficult for that reason. And that's why I really try to continue my relationship with Notre Dame so that it will speak the truth in our cases about a lot of these things that have happened historically, and speak the truth, the fact that we still live with that trauma to this day, and it's still prevalent. So thank you for your comment.
Is there another question just from folks right here?
Hi, I'm actually a current student, maybe the only one here. The men at Lions Hall are in my hall right now, and they invited me to come. And I am a minority on campus, as I am a part of the disabled community. As a part of that community, I was inspired to learn from other minorities on campus. And so I've really been a part of this discussion in the past year. And this discussion is very lively on campus. And students, as you've talked about, are using so much of their finite energy to talk about this. And I think most of us are beyond the point of talking, and most of our conversations revolve around actions. And I think the biggest struggle is, how do we get those ideas of action to actually happen? Because students are constantly talking about this. And I think from the alumni perspective, do you guys have any ideas on how we can actually get this ball rolling and get the university to not only listen, but to start acting with it? So if you have any ideas, talk about that.
I think Notre Dame has done a lot of things. And it seems positive. Again, it's been a long time since I've graduated, over 30 years. I guess when I feel a call to action, I feel it for myself. And I worked at Notre Dame. I told you, I left because I felt that if I wanted to move the needle on Latino student access to higher education, I needed to be there. And that's been my purpose in my career. Why do I not come back to alumni reunions? Can't afford it. It's a lot of money to come. And I have 3 kids. Who's going to take care of them? Now they're all college graduates. Thank you, Lord. And I have time back to myself. But for the longest time, all those challenges make it really hard. And I know that I have friends that are partners of this and partners of that and on the board, and they're like, God, give me like, congratulations. I make 1/50th of what you make in your life, like, and so there's an intimidation factor to that too. So the question I always ask myself is, what difference can I make? What action can I? And that's what I try to live my life with, that purpose. Can Notre Dame do that? Absolutely. And I think, again, I say that there are a lot of positive strides, but I'm going to tell you, what action are you willing to make and do to change this place? Because that's fundamentally, that's the only thing you can control.
Excuse me, but I'm one of the Lions group that originated this whole thing, but I'd like to give it. Not my point. My point is that we very actively solicited top people from Notre Dame to not only come listen to this, but to also participate in this. And so your answer to me is, as I look around the room, I'm seeing provost here incoming. I'm seeing, I'll just tell you, there's at least 10 people in here who can kick some serious butt at Notre Dame if they want to. And I think they're here because they want to. I think that's the answer to your question.
Can I, real quick, answer your question as well? I really like your question. I just want to say briefly, this was actually advice that Leo McWilliams gave me when I was an undergrad. It's really good advice. And I'm sorry that you all have to do this sort of organizing, right? Like, I think I identify with what you're saying of like, just, you shouldn't have to be having these conversations from the bottom up level only, right? One thing I think is really helpful for universities, you have to think of universities as systems, right? They're not, like, you can talk to a person at a university and you might have a great conversation with them, but their job is, they have a job and that job fits within a system. So I think what has been really helpful for me over the years, and again, thank you, Leo, for saying this advice all those years ago, is, to really write down things kind of succinctly in terms of like, sometimes it's important to have things where there's an event where people are just talking and sharing their feelings or sharing their experiences. But oftentimes systems and universities are really well equipped to like deal with written down sort of asks, written down sort of like reason-based versus emotion-based, or logic-based versus emotion-based sort of asks. And so, saying like, we want to support Black students or disabled students or queer students is a, that's a feeling, or it's a feeling, it's a sentiment. But saying like, we want to have a student organization that's funded every year that supports LGBTQ students, that's an ask that comes with a timeline, it comes with money, it comes with like an outcome. And so when you're formulating your asks to work with universities, that I urge you to, if you're not already doing that, like translate things. And the second piece of advice is that like, treat it like, you shouldn't have to treat it this way, but it oftentimes is a negotiation. So like what you're gonna say is, you're gonna say like, I want this. And they're gonna come back and say, well, that doesn't work within our system. We can't do this. What we've already done is this. We urge you to go over here. And you can push back. You don't have to, you should push back respectfully, but assertively, and say like, okay, yeah, we hear that, but this isn't, we see that this is here, but we want this to be integrated in this way, right? Treat it like if it's a place that you love, if it's a place where you're not trying to just be like, mic drop, I'm out of here, but if you really are trying to like love and help this place grow or whatever, treat it like it's relationship building, because it is, right? That's all I would add.
I think this is going to be our last comment or question/comment. And then I'm just going to give any final words back to the panel. Go ahead, sir.
No, the mission statement for the university says that, the intellectual pursuits of the university require diversity. you know, we've talking about relationship of the university, the administration to faculty and students, everything. But what I'd like to know is your thoughts on why the university needs you, why it needs different people of color, people of different sexual identification. What is in your personal story? What's in your ethnicity? What's in your cultural background that the university needs to be the type of influence and the type of, achieve the academic excellence that it wants?
Well, that's a whole nother topic there.
Come back next year for another
Yeah,
panel.
we need to be in the image of America, right? And it's the right thing to do. That's all I can say.
Demographically, the United States is changing drastically. They're going to look like me. And and people will break it down to economics. If we don't educate, brown and Latino poor students, what's this country going to survive on, economically? But is it the right thing to do? What's happening to families and Catholics? That's shrinking and declining. There's so much social change. So why me? I don't know. I love this place. I'm doing hard work. I've raised 3 children. I represent Notre Dame just, like other folks, but I'm not afraid to use my voice, which is what I was telling you. Just use your voice to be the change. And so that's why you need us, is to be the voice. We have 3 generations of alumni here that are all rich in stories and abilities. So, part of what I'm trying to do is look at the demographics that's happening and how is Notre Dame going to adjust to that. I just think that's important.
In architecture, I said to myself, why do I need to go to Rome, Italy? I think I was one of the first people who was asked the dean to stay here on campus. I said, why do you want to stay? I said, what am I going to learn over there? I've been studying European history all my life. I want to stay here. He said, no, you either change your major or change schools. But I got over there and to Rome, and after about 2 months, I immersed myself in it, and I loved it. And and here I am cranking out all these, Doric columns and Ionic columns and Corinthian columns up to my ears. So how am I going to translate this to reservation life, to indigenous communities? And truth is, it was all extremely helpful. It taught me a methodology and how to do that. I just had to retranslate it when I went back and working with different tribes and trying to take a more historic analytical view at how they did things and translate that to nowadays and then put it in the form of healthcare. But in general, architecturally, there's so many principles nowadays that the world over, and especially here in the United States, we're looking back to these green principles, sustainable design. That's the stuff that we've been doing for years. So, So I think one of the things is why Notre Dame needs us is because Black, brown, Hispanic, Latino, Indian, real Indians, people of the world, we all have different talents, we have different perspectives, and so do we. That's all.
I would answer that question by saying, who does Notre Dame want to be for? By asking that question right back. Like, I think there's a trajectory Notre Dame can take if it wants, and it can say, this is the population we're good at serving, and we want to serve that population, and that's it, right? And it can do that. And I think sometimes that is a struggle on campus in different circles, right? But I think Notre Dame strives to be a mission-focused, premier research institution with a Catholic character. Notre Dame can't just be for a select group of individuals who come from a very specific background, right? Because the world is bigger than that. If we're talking about fair, if we're talking about like world class, you can't just leave this, So I would say, who is the campus for? Who is the university for? Who is, when we say the University of Notre Dame, and all that means, if we want it to make the impact that it states it wants to, then we have to not just include and not just diversify, but really, people like us, other minority students and alumni, the disabled community, the LGBT community, et cetera, have to be stakeholders the same way that, students from traditionally like white, Catholic, upper middle class American backgrounds are stakeholders. And so I think that's how I would answer that.
I know we've all answered this question, but it is a really good question. But I also would push back with the question, who has the university grown with? Or who has the university learned from? So relationships require that it's like a give and take. Relationships that remain stagnant are boring. They also often fall apart. The university has remained very, very similar, and it has forced the people who come here to change and grow. But the perspectives that we bring, we can prove ourselves time and time again that we're amazing, because we are. Each of us carries a story that has the ability to change something. But if the university is not willing to take pieces of our story and embed it into its own, it's not going to change. And that is the problem, because we each continue to bring our own story here, and then we walk away from it with a perspective that, oh, the world is really a hard place, or money really does drive certain things. So I don't know. I don't think it's as hard as we make it, because relationships are how we get through life. And so if Notre Dame just takes this as an opportunity to walk in relationship with the people that go to its school, I think it will change. It has to change. But we're so uncomfortable with change. So I thank you for acknowledging that we're all amazing and we carry our own story, but Notre Dame has to take that story. So
It is almost noon, and I cannot, in good conscience, hold these panelists any longer. I personally want to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for your time. Yes, we all need to. And thank you all for being here and for being so engaged. We will continue this conversation.